3 days. That's all I was gone. 3 days at a livestock equipment convention outside Lubbock, eating stale sandwiches, listening to men argue over cattle feed ratios like it was a matter of national security, sleeping in a motel that smelled vaguely like old carpet and bad decisions. Nothing unusual, just work. Then I came home, and for a second, I honestly thought I'd taken the wrong road. The gravel lane leading to my ranch had been there longer than I had. Same ruts, same dust, same crooked fence posts leaning sideways like they were tired of pretending they could still stand straight. It wasn't beautiful, but it was mine. Except when I turned off the highway that afternoon, the gravel was gone. In its place sat a smooth black ribbon of fresh asphalt stretching across my property, like somebody had dropped a piece of suburbia into the middle of cattle country. I slowed my truck, then stopped completely. The engine idled while I stared. Streetlights, curbs, decorative landscaping, even little flower beds. I remember muttering, "What in the hell?" The smell of fresh tar still hung in the air under the Texas sun. Whatever this was, it had happened recently. Then I saw the paper, taped to my front gate. Not mailed, not delivered, taped, flapping in the wind like it was proud of itself. I climbed out, pulled it free, and read it once. Then again, then a third time, because surely I had misunderstood. According to the notice, improvements had been completed under the authority of the Willow Creek Estates Homeowners Association as part of a community beautification initiative designed to improve access and property values for residents. Residents. That word hit me funny, because I wasn't one of them. My ranch bordered Willow Creek Estates, sure. 53 acres sitting right alongside their carefully manicured neighborhood. But I wasn't part of their HOA. Never had been. Never would be. Now don't get me wrong. I had nothing against the people living there. Most of them seemed decent enough. But the neighborhood always felt strange to me. Every hedge looked identical. Every mailbox matched. Every lawn looked like it had been measured with a ruler. The place reminded me of one of those movie sets where everything looks perfect until you get close enough to notice none of it's real. As I drove deeper onto my property, memories started coming back. About 8 years earlier, the original HOA president, a guy named Martin Pierce, had come knocking on my door. Martin was one of those men who smiled so much you wondered if his face ever got tired. He brought cookies, actual cookies, and after about 15 minutes of small talk, he finally got around to asking for a favor. Their neighborhood entrance sat on the opposite side of the development from the main highway. Using my ranch road as a connector would save residents about 5 minutes each way. 5 minutes. That was it. Nothing life-changing. Nothing dramatic. He asked nicely. I said yes. No contracts. No lawyers. No payments. Just a handshake between neighbors. Back then, that still meant something. For years, people drove through without issue. Most kept to themselves. Some waved. A few stopped to chat if they saw me fixing fence or working cattle. It never bothered me. At least not until that afternoon. Because standing there looking at those streetlights, those flower beds, that fresh asphalt laid across my property without a single conversation, I felt something shift inside me. Not rage. Not yet. Something colder. Something quieter. The kind of feeling you get when you realize somebody didn't accidentally cross a line. They looked directly at it and stepped over it anyway. I spent the rest of that evening walking the road. Every few yards, I found something new. Fresh concrete. New drainage pipes, landscaping stone, thousands and thousands of dollars worth of work. Every inch of it built on land they didn't own. The sun was beginning to set when I finally reached the equipment barn near the back pasture. I stood there for a while staring at the old steel cattle gate hanging inside. Heavy duty, 10 feet tall, built to stop a 1,000-pound bull that didn't feel like cooperating. I hadn't used it in years. Most people probably would have called the HOA immediately. Some would have started yelling. A few would have grabbed a shovel and started tearing things apart. But anger makes people careless. And careless people make mistakes. I wasn't interested in making mistakes. I was interested in making a point. So I stood there in the fading light, looking at that gate. And for the first time since I come home, I smiled. Because I just figured out exactly what I was going to do next. And by sunrise, the entire neighborhood was going to realize they had made a very expensive mistake. The next morning didn't start with coffee. It started with diesel. I was up before sunrise, the same way I'd been getting up most of my life. The air still carried that cool edge that disappears once the Texas sun decides it's done being polite. I walked out to the equipment shed, climbed into my old tractor, and fired it up. The engine growled to life. Slow, heavy, steady. I remember sitting there for a second with my hands on the wheel, watching the headlights cut through the darkness. Then I got to work. That old cattle gate wasn't pretty. Nobody would ever mistake it for decorative landscaping. It was 10 feet of solid steel built for one purpose and one purpose only: stopping things. I loaded it onto a trailer and drove toward the center section of my newly upgraded road. Even now, that phrase makes me laugh. My newly upgraded road. The asphalt looked almost black under the dawn sky. Those fancy streetlights they installed cast soft pools of light across property they had absolutely no authority to touch. Whoever planned the project had spent serious money. That part was obvious. What wasn't obvious was how nobody involved had apparently asked one simple question: who actually owns this land? I positioned the gate carefully. No ruse, no drama, no anger, just methodical. I set the posts, anchored the supports, checked the alignment twice, then bolted everything together. By the time the sun finally crested the horizon, the road was closed. Completely. A heavy chain ran through the center. A thick padlock secured it. There would be no misunderstanding. No squeezing around. No driving over the shoulder. Nothing. I stepped back, wiped my hands on my jeans, and admired the view. The shiny suburban shortcut now ended at a cattle gate. It felt right. Then I went home. The first phone call came before breakfast. Unknown number. Ignored. A second call followed. Then a third. By 9 o'clock, my phone looked like it was having a nervous breakdown. Voicemails, texts, emails, everything. I finally listened to one. Hello, Mr. Walker. This is Jennifer from the Willow Creek HOA office. We've received reports regarding an obstruction on the Community Connector Road, and we'd appreciate a return call as soon as possible. Delete. The next one sounded less friendly. The one after that sounded annoyed. By lunchtime, the tone had changed completely. Now, people were angry. Apparently, several residents had already discovered they could no longer use their beloved shortcut. Some were late to work. Others had missed appointments. One woman reportedly sat in her SUV, staring at the gate for 10 minutes, as if it might magically disappear if she looked hard enough. I wasn't enjoying their inconvenience. At least not yet. What interested me was how quickly everyone started acting like something had been taken from them. That road had belonged to me yesterday. It belonged to me today. Yet somehow I was the problem. Around noon, I got a voicemail from an attorney. You can always tell when it's an attorney. They speak like every sentence has been processed through 3 committees and a legal review board. Mr. Walker, this is Richard Bell. We represent Willow Creek Estates. We have reason to believe you're obstructing what has become an established access route utilized by the community. We strongly advise immediate removal of the barrier pending further review. I actually laughed. Out loud. What has become an established access route? That was a creative way of saying private property. By mid-afternoon, I got my first visitor. Her name was Vanessa Langford, the new HOA president. I'd never officially met her before, though I'd heard plenty. Vanessa had moved into the neighborhood a few years earlier and quickly climbed her way into leadership. Some people collect hobbies. Vanessa collected authority. When her SUV rolled up my driveway, I already had a pretty good idea how the conversation was going to go. She stepped out dressed like she was heading to a business luncheon rather than a ranch. Perfect hair, designer sunglasses, pressed clothes, the kind of confidence that usually comes from never hearing the word no. I met her on the porch before she could knock. She didn't waste time. Mr. Walker, you're blocking a community roadway. Not hello. Not nice to meet you. Straight to the accusation. I leaned against the railing. No, I said, I'm blocking my roadway. Her jaw tightened. Only slightly. But I noticed. This route has been incorporated into the neighborhood's transportation infrastructure. Transportation infrastructure. That one almost made me smile. She talked about my road the same way someone might talk about a city street. As though enough people using it somehow transformed ownership. I stepped inside for a moment. When I came back, I was carrying a folder. Property surveys. boundary maps, recorded deeds, everything. I handed them over. For the first time since arriving, Vanessa stopped talking. She looked through the documents carefully. The confidence didn't disappear, but shifted, like someone realizing the game wasn't being played by the rules they expected. "You've enjoyed access because I allowed it," I said calmly. "That's not the same thing as ownership." She handed the papers back. "We invested significant community funds into improving that roadway." There it was. The real issue. Not legality. Money. They'd spent money before securing permission, and now they were trapped. I nodded. "That sounds like a decision you probably should have thought through first." Her expression hardened. "You realize this could become a legal matter." I couldn't help it. I laughed again. Not because it was funny, because it was. "Vanessa," I said, "it's already a legal matter." That got her attention. For the first time all afternoon, she looked uncertain. Just for a second. Then I explained. While everyone else had been admiring their new shortcut, I've been making phone calls. The county sheriff's office already had a report. My attorney already had copies of the surveys. Photographs had been documented. Drone footage had been archived. Construction records were being requested. And, perhaps most importantly, a local television station had received an interesting package about an HOA paving private property without permission. The silence that followed lasted several seconds. Long enough to become uncomfortable. Long enough for both of us to hear the wind moving through the trees. When Vanessa finally spoke, her voice had changed. Only a little, but enough. "You've escalated this." I looked at her, then looked past her toward the road, toward the asphalt, toward the decorative lights, toward every single unauthorized improvement sitting on my land. "No," I said quietly. "You escalated it the day somebody decided they didn't need my permission." For the first time, she didn't have a response. She stood there for another moment, then turned and walked back toward her SUV. Halfway there, she stopped. Without looking back, she said, "This isn't over." Then she drove away. The funny thing is she was right, because up until that point, the fight had only involved me and the HOA leadership. The real trouble was about to begin, and it wasn't going to come from lawyers. It was going to come from the homeowners. The people who suddenly found themselves adding 20 extra minutes to every commute. The people who had been told this road belonged to them. The people who were about to discover that the story they'd been given wasn't entirely true. And once that started happening, Vanessa wasn't going to be fighting me anymore. She was going to be fighting her own neighborhood. Over the next few days, something interesting happened. The people of Willow Creek stopped being angry at me and started asking questions. At first, it was little things. A few complaints in neighborhood Facebook groups. Some frustrated emails. A handful of uncomfortable conversations at community meetings. Then the pressure started building. Because every morning, hundreds of people were now taking the long route. Parents were leaving earlier to get kids to school. Commuters were sitting through extra traffic. Delivery drivers were complaining. Small inconveniences have a funny way of turning into major frustrations when enough people experience them at the same time. About 4 days after I installed the gate, I was repairing fencing near the front pasture when a pickup pulled up. A man climbed out, mid-40s, tired face, construction boots, the kind of guy who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. He walked over and removed his cap. "Mr. Walker?" "That's me." He nodded toward the gate. "I live over in Willow Creek." I waited. He shoved his hands into his pockets. "Look, I just wanted to ask something." "Sure. You really own that road?" I almost laughed. Not at him. At the situation. "Yep." He stared at the asphalt, then at the gate, then back at me. "Nobody told us that." There it was. The sentence that explained everything. Nobody told us that. Most of the homeowners genuinely believed the road had somehow become part of the community. Maybe they assumed easements existed. Maybe they thought agreements had been signed years ago. Maybe they never thought about it at all. But very few had apparently been told the truth. The man shook his head. "Well, that's going to be a problem." I smiled. "Already is." As the week went on, more residents started showing up. Some angry, some curious, some embarrassed. One older woman actually brought me a pie. An apple pie. Homemade. She handed it to me and said, "I don't think what they did was right." Then she looked toward the neighborhood and added, "But I sure do miss that shortcut." That one made me laugh. By the end of the second week, rumors were flying everywhere. Residents wanted answers. Board meetings became tense. Questions became accusations. Who approved the project? Who verified ownership? Why wasn't legal counsel consulted first? How much money had actually been spent? And perhaps the most dangerous question of all, who was responsible? The pressure shifted completely. I wasn't the villain anymore. Vanessa was. Because every angry homeowner was suddenly looking at the same person. The person who had signed off on a project that turned into a disaster. Then came the phone call. I was sitting on my porch watching a thunderstorm roll across the horizon when my phone rang. Vanessa. For a moment, I considered letting it go to voicemail. Instead, I answered. Her voice sounded different. Not weak, not defeated, just tired. We'd like to discuss a resolution. I looked out across the pasture. I suppose that depends on what kind of resolution. There was a pause. Then she said, "Can we meet tomorrow?" The next afternoon, she arrived alone. No attorney, no board members, no atitude, just Vanessa. For the first time since this whole mess started, she looked like a normal person carrying a very large problem. We sat across from each other at a picnic table behind my barn. She opened a folder. "We're prepared to remove all improvements." I said nothing. "We'll restore the gravel road." Still nothing. "We'll cover all restoration costs." She swallowed. "And we'll provide additional compensation equal to 3 times the estimated damages." Objectively speaking, it was a strong offer. Most people would have taken it immediately. Walk away. Cash the check. Move on. But as I sat there listening, something kept bothering me. Because fixing the road wasn't actually fixing the problem. The problem wasn't asphalt. The problem was entitlement. The assumption that they could make decisions first and ask permission later. After a long silence, I shook my head. No. Vanessa blinked. Just once. The way people do when reality suddenly takes an unexpected turn. No. No. For the first time in weeks, she looked genuinely confused. "Then what exactly do you want?" I leaned back in my chair. "You can keep the road." Her eyebrows lifted. "The asphalt, the lights, the drainage, all of it." Now she was staring. I continued. "If your residents want to keep using it, that's fine." Hope appeared on her face. Then I finished the sentence. "You rent it." The hope disappeared. Silence. A long one. Finally she asked, "Rent it?" $1,000 a month. She didn't speak. "If the payment arrives on time, the gate stays open." Still silence. "If a payment is missed, the gate closes." The wind moved through the pasture. Somewhere in the distance, cattle were making noise near the pond. Vanessa looked down at the paperwork in front of her, then back at me. I could practically see the calculations happening behind her eyes. Legal costs, public relations damage, resident complaints, future liability, the growing possibility of losing her position. Eventually, she asked the question I knew was coming. "Would you actually close it again?" I smiled. "You've seen the gate." A week later, the contract arrived. Clean, simple, legally binding, signed. The road remained exactly where it was. The lights stayed. The asphalt stayed. The neighborhood kept its shortcut. And every month a check arrived, right on schedule. The funny thing is, after a while, the money stopped being important. $1,000 is nice. Don't get me wrong. But what stayed with me wasn't the income. It was the reminder. Every payment represented something bigger. A correction. A boundary. Proof that ownership still meant something. Sometimes I'll drive my tractor down that road and see families walking their dogs beneath those decorative streetlights. Kids riding bikes. Neighbors chatting. Life moving along normally. Most of them probably don't even think about how that road got there. And honestly, that's okay. Because I do. I remember standing there that first afternoon, staring at a road that suddenly didn't feel like mine anymore. I remember the anger, the disbelief, the realization that somebody had mistaken access for authority. And I remember deciding, right then and there, that if this situation was going to be resolved, it would be resolved on terms that respected the truth. Not convenience, not popularity, the truth. Now here's the question I always get whenever I tell this story. Did I go too far? Some people say I should have taken the money and let them restore everything. Others say charging rent was the perfect lesson. Personally, I still don't know if there's a perfect answer. Maybe there isn't one. What I do know is this. If someone benefits from something you own, that doesn't make it theirs. And the longer people forget that, the more expensive the reminder usually becomes. So now I'd like to hear from you. If you came home and found strangers had transformed part of your property without permission, what would you have done? Would you have accepted the payout and moved on? Would you have fought harder? Or would you have done exactly what I did and turned their mistake into a monthly bill? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, because I can already tell this one is going to divide people right down the middle. And if you've ever dealt with an HOA, a property dispute, or a neighbor who forgot where the boundary line was, share your story too. I'd love to hear how it ended.